Pull up a chair, friend, and let me tell you a story. This one's about the Old West, but not the kind you see in picture shows, with gunfights and outlaws. No, this is about something quieter, something truer. It's about a young woman who got on a train heading west with another woman's photograph in her pocket and another woman's name on the marriage papers. It's about a rancher who needed a wife to keep his land and got something he never expected instead. Maybe you know what it's like to feel invisible, to be the sensible one, the reliable one, the one folks overlook. Maybe you've spent years wondering if anyone would ever see you for who you really are. This story's for you. Now settle in. I've got a pot of coffee on, and the evening's young. The train coughed black smoke and shuddered to a stop. Clara Ashworth gripped her valise handle until her knuckles went white. Through the soot-streaked window. Willow Creek wasn't much to look at 3 rows of unpainted buildings. A general store with a crooked sign. Red dust rising from the street like the land itself was breathing. She touched the photograph in her pocket. Her sister's face, Margaret's face. "You'll do fine," Margaret had said, pressing the train ticket into Clara's palm. "He's never seen either of us." What's the difference? The difference was everything. Clara stepped down from the passenger car. The August heat sat heavy on her shoulders like a wet wool coat. Sweat trickled down the back of her neck, soaking into her collar. She could smell coal smoke from the locomotive, horse manure from the street, and dry sage carried on the wind the smell of hard country that didn't coddle soft folks. A man stood beside a wagon at the end of the platform. Tall, broad across the shoulders, dark hair showing beneath his hat brim. He held a piece of paper in his left hand. Not paper. A photograph. He looked down at it, then up at her. His jaw tightened. Clara stopped walking. Her heart beat once, twice, 3 times in the silence between them. He knows. He can see I'm not her. He's going to put me right back on that train. You, Clara. His voice was lower than she expected, rougher, like a man who didn't waste words on things that didn't need saying. "Yes, sir." He looked at the photograph again, then at her. Something worked behind his eyes, not anger. Exactly. More like a man who'd learned to stop expecting good news a long time ago. He folded the photograph once and slipped it into his shirt pocket without another glance. Luggage. Clara lifted her valise. The handle was rope instead of leather. Pa hadn't seen fit to spend money on a proper bag for a daughter he was sending away. Just this. He didn't offer to carry it, just nodded toward the wagon. "Best get moving. Long ride ahead." She climbed up onto the seat beside him. The wood was worn smooth and sun-bleached, the kind of smooth that came from years of use. A single bay mare waited in the traces, her coat dull with trail dust, a white blaze on her forehead. Silas Harding didn't introduce himself, didn't explain the photograph. Didn't ask why her face was thinner than the portrait he'd been sent, why her hair was brown where the picture showed golden, why she carried everything she owned in a bag held together with rope and prayer. He clicked his tongue. The mare stepped forward. Red dust rose around the wheels like a veil. 10 miles of nothing but silence and sky. Clara watched the land unfold through the shimmer of heat. Dry grass, the color of old straw, stretched clear to the horizon. Cottonwood trees huddled along a creek bed, their leaves silver green and trembling in a breeze she couldn't feel down here on the road. somewhere high overhead. A hawk circled against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. She wanted to ask questions. How far is the ranch? Is there a town nearby? What happened to your people? But Silas sat beside her, like a man carved from the same stone as this country weathered. Silent, giving nothing away for free. She stole glances at his profile when she thought he wasn't paying attention. Strong nose, jaw that hadn't seen a razor in 3 or 4 days, hands rough and scarred, wrapped easy around the reins like they'd been doing this work since before he could remember. Not handsome, exactly, but solid, real, the kind of man who'd still be standing when the storm passed. He caught her looking. Clara turned away quick, heat flooding her cheeks that had nothing to do with the August sun. What did he see in that photograph? The question gnawed at her like a sore tooth. Margaret was beautiful, everyone said so, had said so since they were girls. Fair hair, blue eyes, a smile that made men forget their own names. Clara had spent her whole life standing in that shadow, and she'd gotten used to the shade. He was expecting her. He got me instead. The wagon crested a small rise, and Clara caught her breath. Below them, a ranch house sat in a shallow valley. Not grand, just a cabin of weathered timber with a stone chimney, a barn that could use a coat of paint, a corral with split-rail fencing gone gray in the weather. But behind the house, she could see what was left of a garden dead stakes and bare earth where something green had grown once, before someone stopped tending it. "That's the place," Silas said. First words in an hour. "That's home?" Clara nodded, because she didn't trust her voice. "This is it. This is where I'll live. This is the man I'll marry. And he already knows I'm not what he asked for." The inside of the cabin smelled like cold grease and dust and loneliness. Clara stood in the doorway while Silas set her valise on the floor. One main room kitchen and parlor together, with a cast-iron stove in the corner and a table built for a man who took his meals alone. 2 doors at the back, leading to who knows where. No curtains on the windows, no flowers in a vase, no softness anywhere a body might rest. But someone had lived here once. A woman. Clara could see the signs if she looked close enough. A sampler on the wall, faded to near colorlessness. The stitched words no longer readable, but still hanging there like someone couldn't bear to take it down. A rocking chair by the cold hearth, the wood worn smooth from years of use. A flower canister painted with roses, chipped now but still pretty in its way. And on the mantel above the fireplace, a photograph frame, turned face down. Dust settled thick around it, but the shelf itself was clean. Someone still wiped this mantel regular. They just didn't touch that frame. "Room's at the end of the hall." Silas nodded toward the left-hand door. "Blankets in the chest if you need them." "Thank you. Privy's out back. Pumps by the barn. Water's good, comes up cold even in summer." He was already moving toward the other door, his room. She reckoned. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Clara stood alone in the fading light. "This is your home now," she told herself. "Make it so. Or don't. Nobody's going to do it for you." She crossed to the mantel. The photograph frame lay there, its wooden back facing up. Keeping its secrets, her fingers itched to lift it, to see who this woman was, his mother, a wife who'd passed, someone he'd loved and lost. She didn't touch it. Instead, she turned to the cold stove, found kindling in a box beside it, matches in a tin on the shelf. She built a fire, when Clara was small enough to think that being useful might make someone love her. The wood caught. Flames licked up, throwing yellow light and dancing shadows across the dusty floor. One thing at a time, she thought. Start with what you can do. The rest will come. Lord willing. Behind her, through the thin wall. She heard Silas's boots hit the floor, the creak of a bed frame. Then nothing but quiet. Clara lowered herself into the rocking chair by the hearth. The wood was smooth beneath her palms, worn into gentle curves by someone else's hands, someone else's evenings, someone else's prayers. She wondered how many nights that woman had sat here, watching the fire die down, waiting for morning. She closed her eyes. I am not Margaret. I will never be Margaret. But maybe, Lord, just maybe that doesn't have to be the end of things. The fire crackled and popped. Outside. The first stars came out over the prairie, thick as spilled salt across black cloth, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the cabin walls, a coyote called out to its mate, a long, lonesome sound that seemed to carry all the way to heaven. Clara was still sitting there when sleep finally took her, her head resting against the high back of the chair, the fire burning low, the photograph on the mantel still turned away from the world and keeping its secrets close. If this story's found you tonight, wherever you're sitting, we'd be glad to know. Drop a word and tell us where you're listening from, as the old folks always said. A story shared is a story doubled. Clara woke to the sound of mice scratching in the walls. Gray light seeped through the window glass. Her neck ached something fierce from sleeping crooked in the chair, and the fire had gone to cold ash hours ago. Her breath made thin clouds in the early air. She pushed herself up, pressing both hands to the small of her back where the ache had settled deep. The cabin was quiet, except for those mice, and the wind finding its way through gaps in the chinking. Move. Do something useful. The water bucket by the stove sat empty. She found the pump out by the barn, worked the handle until rust-colored water turned clear, then hauled the full bucket back to the house. Her arms burned with the weight. Water sloshed against her skirt, soaking the hem dark. By the time she had the stove lit and coffee boiling, real coffee. Not the chicory stuff Ma stretched to make it last. Boots sounded heavy on the floorboards behind her. She turned. Silas stood in the kitchen doorway, wearing the same clothes as yesterday. Wool shirt, canvas trousers, suspenders hanging loose at his hips. His hair lay flat on one side from the pillow. He looked at the steaming pot, then at her, and something flickered across his face, too quick to read. Coffee's ready, Clara said. He crossed to the shelf without a word, took down a tin cup, poured for himself, stood drinking by the window, watching the pale sky turn pink along the eastern edge. Clara's stomach knotted tight. She waited for him to say something, to ask about the photograph, to demand explanations. He set down the empty cup. I'll be working the south pasture till sundown. He reached for his hat on the peg by the door. Biscuits in the box should still be good. Flowers in the bin if you want to make fresh. The door opened, closed. His boots crossed the porch, and then nothing but silence. Clara stood alone in the kitchen, her hands pressed flat against the worn tabletop. Her fingertips found the grooves and scratches left by years of cutting and kneading. He's not going to ask. Not going to say one word about it. She couldn't decide if that was mercy or something worse. The morning stretched ahead empty as the prairie outside. She washed her face in cold water from the basin, ate a biscuit that tasted like dust and regret, walked through the cabin touching things: the faded sampler, the rose-painted canister, the cold iron of the stove, the rocking chair by the hearth, the photograph on the mantel, still face down, still waiting. Clara's fingers hovered over the wooden frame. Don't leave it be. But she needed to know what kind of house she'd walked into, what kind of ghosts lived here alongside the living. She lifted the frame, turned it over. A woman stared back at her, silver hair pinned up neat, a stern face lined by years and weather, eyes the exact gray blue of Silas Harding's eyes. His mother. Had to be. But there, tucked behind the first photograph, hidden, unless you looked close, another picture. Smaller, newer. Clara's breath caught. A young woman. Fair hair. Pretty face. A smile that promised things. Not Margaret. Someone else entirely. Who were you, and what happened to make him turn your picture to the wall? Clara put the photograph back exactly how she found it. Her hands shook as she laid the frame face down on the mantel, careful to match the dust lines. The fair-haired woman's face burned in her mind, young, pretty, the kind of smile that made promises, the kind of face men crossed oceans for, let alone prairies. Not Margaret. Someone who came before me. She pressed her palms flat against the rough wood until the trembling stopped. None of your business. Clara, you're here now. That's what matters. The garden called to her. She'd seen it yesterday from the wagon seat, dead stakes. Bare earth, the bones of something that used to live. Now, standing at the back door with the morning sun warming her face, she saw it plain. Rows of nothing. Weeds choking what little remained. A wooden frame for climbing beans, collapsed and rotting, half sunk into the dirt. Someone had loved this garden once. Someone had planted and watered and weeded and watched things grow. And then they'd stopped. And the land had taken it all back. Clara walked the edges slow. The soil was hard-packed, cracked from weeks of August sun without a drop of rain. She knelt down, pressed her fingers into the dirt. It crumbled apart like old bread left too long on the shelf. Needs water, needs work, needs someone stubborn enough not to quit. She found a spade in the barn, hanging on the wall beside coils of rope and rusted horseshoes. The handle was smooth from years of use, worn to fit a specific pair of hands, smaller hands than hers, a woman's hands. Clara carried it back to the garden. The first weeds came up hard. She had to dig around the roots, pry them loose, shake the dirt free before tossing them aside. The sun climbed higher. Sweat ran down her temples, stinging her eyes. Her shoulders burned. Her lower back screamed with every bend and twist. She didn't stop. By noon, she'd cleared one row. Just one row in a garden full of dead things. But it was something. Her fingernails were black with soil. Blisters had risen on both palms, pale and fat with fluid. The skin around them had gone red and angry. She sat back on her heels, breathing hard, and looked at what she'd done. Not much, not near enough. But it was a start. The kitchen drawer held a discovery, a small wooden box shoved behind the flour bin. Forgotten or hidden. She couldn't say which. Inside, paper packets tied with kitchen string. Clara unfolded one with careful fingers. Seeds. Small and dark, rattling like tiny whispers against the paper. Handwriting on the packet. Faded brown ink in a neat, slanting hand. Tomatoes, 1879. Another packet, pole beans, 1880. A woman had written these labels, the same woman who'd worn down that spade handle, who'd sat in that rocking chair, who'd painted roses on the flour canister, the woman in the photograph with Silas's eyes, his mother. Clara tucked the seed packets into her apron pocket. She would plant them. She would make something grow in this hard ground, or she would wear herself out trying. The afternoon passed in a blur of digging and hauling water. She made 6 trips to the pump, arms shaking with the weight of full buckets, dress soaked through with sweat and well water. The August sun pressed down on her back like a hot iron. Twice she had to stop and sit in the shade of the barn, head spinning, mouth dry as the dust under her feet. She didn't quit. The sun was dropping toward the western hills, painting the sky orange and pink, when she heard hoofbeats on the road. Clara straightened up from the row she was working, one hand pressed against her aching back. Dirt streaked her face. Her dress was ruined, past saving. The hem caked with mud. The bodice dark with sweat stains. She looked, she knew, like something a dog had dragged home and forgotten about. Silas rode in from the south pasture, his horse dark and lathered from a long day's work. He swung down by the corral, looped the reins over the rail, and stood there a long moment, looking at the garden, looking at her. Clara held her ground. She didn't try to smooth her hair or brush the dirt from her cheeks. This was what she was, a woman who worked. If he didn't like the sight of it, he could say so plain. Silas walked toward her, stopped at the edge of the cleared row. His eyes moved across the fresh-turned earth, dark and damp where she'd watered it, moved to the bean frame, now propped upright with stones she'd hauled from the creek bed, moved to her hands, raw and blistered, still gripping the spade. His jaw worked. Something moved behind his eyes. "Supper," Clara said, her voice rough from thirst. "I made biscuits fresh, and there's beans from the jar in the pantry." Silas nodded slow. He turned toward the house, took 2 steps, stopped. "There's gloves," he said without looking back. "In the barn, hanging on a nail by the door. Leather ones. Ought to fit." Then he walked on, boots heavy on the porch steps, and disappeared inside. Clara stood in the garden as the last light bled out of the sky. Her hands throbbed. Her back felt like someone had taken a hammer to it, but something had kindled in her chest, small, fragile, warm. He noticed. He saw what I did. She walked to the barn on legs that didn't want to hold her up anymore, found the nail by the door. The gloves hung there in the shadows, soft brown leather worn to butter smoothness from years of use, too big for her hands, made for someone else. Clara lifted them to her face, breathed in deep, rosewater, faint, nearly gone. But there the ghost of a woman's scent pressed into old leather. These were hers, the woman in the hidden photograph. Clara's fingers tightened on the gloves. "Who were you? Why did you leave? And why does he still keep your things?" The clock had stopped years ago. Clara found it in the barn on a rainy afternoon, buried beneath old saddle blankets and cracked harness leather that smelled of mildew and forgotten time. A pendulum clock in a walnut case, Roman numerals on a yellowed face, The glass cracked clean across from corner to corner, the hands frozen at 7 minutes past 3. She carried it into the house like something wounded, cradling it against her chest. 1 month had passed since she stepped off that train. The garden showed green now, tomato seedlings pushing up through dark soil, bean vines climbing the mended frame she'd rebuilt with her own 2 hands. Clara's palms had calloused over. The blisters hardened into tough skin that didn't tear anymore when she worked the pump handle or hauled water buckets across the yard. And Silas had started coming home earlier. He never said why, never explained, just appeared at the corral while the sun still hung 2 hands above the horizon, unsaddled his horse with slow, careful movements, and found reasons to linger near the house instead of riding the fence lines until dark, checking hinges that didn't need checking, oiling door latches that swung just fine. Once, he spent a whole evening fixing a cabinet door Clara hadn't even noticed was crooked. Tonight, she sat at the kitchen table with the clock spread out before her in pieces. Gears and springs and tiny screws, each one laid careful on a flour sack cloth so nothing would roll away and get lost. The kerosene lamp threw jumping shadows across the walls, and the smell of lamp oil mixed with the faint scent of machine grease from the clock's innards. Silas sat in the corner by the cold stove, a 3-week-old newspaper from town spread open on his knee. He turned pages now and then, but his eyes kept drifting up, quick glances when he thought she wasn't paying attention. She felt them like touches on the back of her neck. Clara didn't look up. Her fingers worked a bent gear back into shape, using a spoon handle as a lever because she didn't have proper tools. The metal resisted. She pressed harder, feeling the strain in her wrist. Belonged to my father. Clara's hands went still. She raised her head. Silas was looking at the clock pieces now, the newspaper forgotten in his lap. The lamplight carved deep shadows under his cheekbones, made his eyes look darker than usual. Bought it in St. Louis, he said. Year I was born. Carried it all the way out here in the back of the wagon, wrapped in Ma's wedding quilt so it wouldn't break. The corner of his mouth twitched. She used to say he was more careful with that clock than he ever was with her good china. Clara set down the spoon. What happened to it? Spring broke, 3 years back, maybe 4. He turned a page of the newspaper without seeing the words printed there. Pa tried to fix it himself. Spent I don't know how many evenings sitting right where you're sitting, fussing with those gears. Never could get the mechanism to catch right. He came close. Clara held up the mainspring, coiled tight as a snake ready to strike. See here. He cleaned it proper. Oiled all the parts that needed oiling. Just needed a new pal, this little piece here. She pointed to a worn nub of metal no bigger than her fingernail. The old one's ground down to almost nothing. That's why it wouldn't run. Silas's eyebrows lifted. You know clocks. My grandfather was a watchmaker, back in Pennsylvania, before he moved the family to Ohio. Clara fitted the spring back into its brass housing, feeling it click into place. I used to sit in his shop after school, watching him work. Drove him half crazy with questions. But he taught me, said I had the hands for it, steady and patient. Something moved across Silas's face. Not quite a smile. Something close to it, though, closer than she'd seen before. Pa would have liked you. The words hung in the air between them, unexpected and warm. Clara's throat went tight. She bent over the clock, hiding her face, fitting gears back into place with fingers that suddenly wouldn't stay steady. An hour passed. Maybe 2. The newspaper lay forgotten on the floor where it had slipped from Silas's knee. He'd moved his chair closer to the table without her notice, and now he sat watching her work, passing tools when she asked for them, holding the lamp closer when she needed more light on some fiddly bit of mechanism. Their fingers brushed once over a tiny screw no bigger than a grain of wheat. Neither one pulled away. Clara held her breath, fitted the last gear into place, wound the mainspring 3 careful turns, counting under her breath the way grandfather had taught her. The clock began to tick. The sound filled the kitchen soft, steady, alive, like a heartbeat that had stopped and started again after years of silence. Clara looked up at Silas. His eyes had gone bright in the lamplight. He was staring at the clock like a man watching a ghost walk through the wall. "Pa." His voice came out rough, scraped raw. "He sat right where you're sitting, night after night, trying to make it run again." Clara lifted the clock, gentle as a sleeping child, carried it to the mantel, set it down beside the face-down photograph frame. The ticking seemed to grow louder in the quiet, filling up the empty spaces. She turned back to face him. Silas was standing now, close, closer than he'd ever stood to her before. She could smell wood smoke on his shirt, horse sweat. Something underneath that was just him, clean and warm and real. "The photograph," he said quiet. "The one I sent away for a bride. It wasn't your sister." Clara's heart stopped dead in her chest. "I know," she whispered. Silas reached past her, his arm brushing her shoulder. He lifted the frame from the mantel, turned it over, and looked down at the 2 photographs tucked inside. His mother with her stern face and silver hair, and the fair-haired woman with her pretty smile. Her name was Mary. His voice was flat now, careful, like a man walking on thin ice. "She answered my letter, sent that picture, took the money I wired for her train ticket." He set the frame back down on the mantel, face up this time. "She never came." Clara couldn't breathe. The clock ticked between them, counting seconds that felt like hours. "What happened?" Silas looked at her then. Really looked. His eyes searching her face like he was trying to read words written in a language he'd forgotten how to speak. "She got as far as Willow Creek, stepped off the train, looked around at the dust and the empty sky and the nothing stretching out to the horizon." His jaw tightened. "Looked at me standing there in my work clothes with dirt on my boots. Then she turned around, walked back to the ticket window, and bought passage on the next train heading east. Didn't say one word to me, not one." The lamp flame guttered in a draft. Shadows jumped across the walls. "So you sent for another bride," Clara said. "No." Silas shook his head slow. "I didn't send for anyone. That letter your folks answered, I wrote it 2 years ago, to Mary, before she ever came out here." He paused. "Someone must have kept it, passed it along after she left. I never knew until you showed up at that station." The room tilted under Clara's feet. She grabbed the edge of the mantel to steady herself. If he didn't send for Margaret, if he didn't send for anyone. "Then who?" she heard herself ask. "Arranged my marriage." The question hung between them like wood smoke, with nowhere to go. Clara's mind raced backward through the months, turning over memories like stones in a creek bed, the letter arriving at Pa's boarding house in Ohio on a Tuesday afternoon, his hands shaking as he read it aloud at supper, his voice strange and tight, Margaret laughing, tossing her golden hair, pushing back from the table with her nose wrinkled up. "Marry some dirt farmer in the middle of nowhere, I'd sooner die." And then the arrangement. Clara would go instead. Clara, who was plain. Clara, who was useful. Clara, who nobody would miss when she was gone. But if Silas hadn't written that letter, I don't know. Her voice came out thin, stretched like thread about to snap. Pa handled all the correspondence. He said a rancher out in Wyoming needed a wife. Said there was money wired for the train passage. Silas's jaw went hard. Money came from somewhere. It surely wasn't from me. The clock ticked steady on the mantel. Clara pressed her hand against the table edge, feeling the wood grain bite into her palm. Something solid to hold on to, while the floor pitched beneath her feet. Does it matter now? She asked. Silas looked at her. The lamplight made his eyes unreadable, deep as well water. Reckon it might. But he didn't say anything more. Just took his hat from the peg by the door and walked out into the darkness, leaving Clara alone with the ticking clock and the mystery of how she'd come to be standing in this kitchen at all. She didn't sleep that night, lay awake in the narrow bed, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the wind push against the walls and the mice scratch their highways through the darkness. The garden saved her. 2.5 months now since she'd stepped off that train. September had come and cooled the brutal heat. And Clara's tomato plants hung heavy with fruit-red globes fat as a man's fist. Some of them split at the top from too much juice inside. The pole beans had climbed past the frame she'd built, reaching up toward heaven. And she'd already put up 3 bushels in brine for winter. Silas had built her a drying rack without being asked. Appeared one morning by the side of the barn, hammer in hand, putting together a frame of pine slats. Clara watched from the kitchen window, her hand still in the bread dough, something warm spreading through her chest like sun on cold skin. Now she knelt between the rows, pulling weeds that kept coming back no matter how many times she yanked them out, the leather gloves soft against her fingers. She wore them every day now. The rosewater scent had faded away weeks ago, replaced by her own smell, dirt and sweat, and the green tang of tomato leaves, hoofbeats on the road. Clara straightened up, shading her eyes against the afternoon glare. Not Silas he'd ridden out to the north pasture at dawn to check on the fence lines before the weather turned. This rider came from the direction of town, moving at a steady trot. The horse pulled up at the gate. A man in a dusty traveling coat swung down. A bowler hat on his head that looked wrong for this country. A leather satchel tucked under his arm. Mrs. Harding. Clara's stomach dropped like a stone in still water. She wasn't Mrs. Harding. Not really. Not legally. They'd never even talked about a ceremony, about making this arrangement proper in the eyes of the law. I'm Clara. The man smiled. Too many teeth showing, like a dog that had learned to grin but didn't know what it meant. Name's Pemberton. I represent the Western Land Trust out of Cheyenne. He pulled a folded document from his satchel. I'm here about the property. What property? This ranch, ma'am? The Harding claim? He made a show of consulting the paper. According to county records, Silas Harding has failed to meet the terms of his father's last will and testament. Samuel Harding's estate specified marriage within 12 months of his death as a condition of inheritance. That 12 months ended 2 months back. Clara's knees went soft. She grabbed the fence post to keep from going down. There must be some mistake. No mistake. I'm afraid. Pemberton tucked the document back into his satchel like a man putting away a winning hand of cards. Unless Mr. Harding can produce a valid certificate of marriage, the land reverts to the trust for redistribution. We'll be filing the transfer paperwork at the county courthouse end of the month. End of the month? 3 weeks away. Maybe less. I'll need to speak with my husband. The words stuck in her throat. Foreign and false. Pemberton touched the brim of his hat. You do that, ma'am. Tell him we'll be in touch directly. He climbed back on his horse and rode off toward town. Dust rising behind him like a judgment coming due, Clara stood frozen in the garden, her hands still gripping the rough wood of the fence post. Her knuckles had gone white. Marriage certificate. They need proof we're wed. But there was no certificate. No preacher had spoken words over them. No record existed in any courthouse ledger. She'd been living in this house for months now, sleeping in the spare room, cooking meals, working the garden, building something she'd let herself believe might last. And none of it was legal. None of it was real in the eyes of the law. The gate creaked open behind her. Clara spun around. Silas stood at the edge of the garden, his horse ground-tied by the barn. He must have seen the rider coming over the rise from the north pasture. Must have come running to see what trouble had found them. His face had gone pale beneath the sun-dark tan. I heard, he said. I was coming down the hill when he rode up. Heard most of it. Clara's throat squeezed shut. The land, your pa's will, I know what my pa's will says. Silas pulled off his hat, ran his hand through his hair. I've been running out the clock, hoping the land trust would lose interest. Forget about one small ranch out in the middle of nothing. They haven't forgotten. No. He looked at her then. Really looked. The same way he'd looked at her in the kitchen when the clock started its ticking. Clara, I got no right to ask you for anything. You came here under false pretenses, not your doing. I know that now. Someone used you, used both of us, played us like fiddles at a barn dance. Clara waited. The wind pushed at her skirt, flapped the loose strands of hair around her face. There's a preacher in Willow Creek, Silas said. Man named Burke. We could ride in tomorrow morning. Make this thing legal and proper. He swallowed, his throat working. If you're willing. The garden held its breath. The tomatoes hung red and heavy on their vines. The bean poles stood tall against the September sky. Is that what you want? Clara heard herself ask. A marriage on paper just to keep the land from the trust. Silas's eyes never left her face. I want... He stopped, took a breath, started over. I want to know something first. What's that Sunday 2 weeks back, when you were fixing the bean frame where the wind knocked it crooked? I watched you from inside the barn for near an hour. He paused. You were singing, something about a river, and resting on the shore. Clara's cheeks went hot. She remembered that afternoon. The sun warm on her back. The satisfaction of mending something broken. The old hymn Grandma used to sing coming out of her mouth before she could think to stop it. What about it? Silas reached out. His rough fingers brushed her cheek, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. That's when I knew. His voice dropped low. Quiet. Meant just for her. Paper or no paper. Certificate or no certificate. You already belong here. Clara couldn't make words come. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it beating in her throat. Tomorrow, she said at last. We'll ride to town at first light. Silas nodded. His hand dropped back to his side. But something had shifted between them. Some fence had come down. Some gate had swung open. They walked back toward the house together, shoulders almost touching, close enough that Clara could feel the warmth coming off his body. The sun sank low behind the western hills, setting the sky ablaze in orange and red and pink. Clara watched their shadows stretch out long ahead of them, two figures moving side by side across the hard-packed dirt, and let herself imagine just for a moment what tomorrow might bring. Then she saw it, a letter lying on the kitchen table. White envelope, crisp and clean. Eastern postmark. The ink still sharp and dark. Her sister's handwriting. Clara's blood went cold as creek water in January. Margaret. Clara stood in the kitchen doorway, her feet rooted to the floorboards like they'd grown there. The letter sat on the table like a coiled rattlesnake waiting to strike. White paper, blue ink. Margaret's looping handwriting spelling out the address in that pretty script she'd learned at the Ladies' Academy, the same handwriting that had filled childhood diaries with complaints about Clara borrowing her hair ribbons. The same hand that had shoved the train ticket into Clara's palm 3 months ago and said, "You'll do fine, little sister." What's the difference? Silas stepped past her, picked up the envelope, turned it over in his rough hands. "Came with the supply wagon from town," he said. "Driver left it on the porch rail." Clara's throat had closed up tight. She couldn't push a single word past her teeth. Silas held the letter out to her. "You don't have to read it tonight. Morning's soon enough." But she did have to read it. She knew she did. Whatever poison Margaret had put down on that paper, it was already seeping into the room like smoke from a green wood fire, already tainting the air between them. Clara took the letter. The paper shook in her fingers. She broke the wax seal. "Dear little sister, word has reached us here in Ohio that Father's scheme worked out after all. The neighbors on Maple Street talk of nothing else these days, imagine. Plain little Clara married off to a rancher with 200 acres of good land. Mother nearly fainted dead away when she heard the news from Mrs. Patterson at church. I confess I was wrong about your prospects in life. A woman's fortune can turn in strange ways. Can it not, I have been thinking these past weeks. It occurs to me that you went west in my place, carrying my photograph in your pocket, answering a letter that was meant for me. Legally speaking, one might argue that any marriage contracted under such circumstances belongs rightfully to the woman whose name and likeness were used to secure it. Not that I would press such a claim against my own blood. We are sisters, after all, and family must stick together. Still, I find myself mighty curious about this Mr. Harding and his property. Father says the land alone is worth a small fortune, if the railroad comes through like folks are saying. Perhaps I shall come visit and see for myself what my little sister has stumbled into out there in the wilderness. Expect me by month's end. Your loving sister. Margaret Clara's hands stopped their shaking. They'd gone numb instead, like they belonged to someone else. The paper crinkling between her frozen fingers, using my photograph, letter meant for me. Marriage belongs rightfully Clara. She looked up. Silas stood watching her face, his eyes dark and steady in the lamplight. He hadn't tried to read over her shoulder, hadn't asked what the letter said, just waited. "My sister." The words came out flat, scraped clean of feeling. "She's fixing to come here." Silas's jaw tightened. When, end of the month, the same deadline Pemberton had given them, the same 3 weeks, maybe less. Clara's mind spun with the collision of it, the land trust coming for the property, Margaret coming for the marriage. Everything she'd built these past months crumbling to dust between her fingers. "Let me see it." Clara handed over the letter. Watched his eyes track across the lines. Watched his face go still and hard as quarry stone. He set the paper down on the table. "Your pa," he said, slow and careful like a man picking his way across a frozen pond. He arranged this whole business. All of it. I didn't know. I believe you. Silas crossed to the window, staring out at the darkening yard where the first stars were coming out. Someone dug up that old letter I wrote Mary 2 years back. Someone saw a chance to make use of it. Your pa grabbed hold of that chance to ship off a daughter he didn't want cluttering up his house no more. The words hit Clara like stones thrown hard. She'd always known, somewhere deep in her bones, that her parents favored Margaret, the pretty one, the clever one, the one who mattered. But hearing it said out loud in this kitchen, by this man who had no reason to lie, it made the knowing sharper, harder, impossible to pretend away. And now Margaret wants to take my place. Silas turned from the window. Can she do it legally? I don't know. Clara pressed her palms flat against the table, feeling the solid wood beneath her skin. The photograph was hers. The letter you wrote was addressed to a woman matching her description, not mine. If she argues before a judge that I committed fraud to get out here, you didn't commit any fraud. You were sent here by your own family. A judge might not see it that way, especially if Margaret brings Pa's letters as evidence. He'd testify against me in a heartbeat if it meant getting something out of the deal. The clock on the mantel ticked its steady rhythm. That sound, the heartbeat of the house Clara had brought back to life, now seemed to mock her. Time running out, sand through the glass, everything running out. Silas crossed the room, stood in front of her, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off his body, smell the dust and sage and honest sweat on his clothes. We ride to town come morning, he said. Get married proper before your sister sets foot in Wyoming, before the land trust files their papers at the courthouse. And if Margaret challenges it after, let her try. His voice was rough, certain as bedrock. You've been here 3 months now. You've worked this land with your own 2 hands, slept under this roof, taken your meals at this table. That's more than Margaret Ashworth has ever done or ever will. Clara searched his face, looking for doubt, looking for the shadow of regret. She found neither. Why, she whispered. You could find yourself another woman easy enough. Someone prettier. Someone without a scheming family trying to take what isn't theirs. Silas's mouth twisted sideways, not quite a smile, but close kin to one. Pretty women come and go. Found that out hard when Mary turned tail and ran. He reached out, took Clara's hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid and real. You fixed my pa's clock that hadn't run in years. You brought the garden back from bare dirt and dead sticks. You sing old hymns when you think nobody's listening. He squeezed her fingers. I'm not looking for pretty, Clara. I'm looking for someone who'll stay put when the weather turns bad. Clara couldn't breathe. Her chest felt too tight, too full, like something caged up inside was fixing to break free. I'll stay, she said. I know you will. He let go of her hand, stepped back, the moment stretched out thin between them, fragile and new as a just-hatched chick. Get yourself some sleep, Silas said. Long ride to town tomorrow. He walked to his room. The door closed soft behind him. Clara stood alone in the kitchen, Margaret's letter still lying on the table like a dropped gauntlet. She picked it up, read it through one more time, letting the words burn themselves into her memory. Expect me by month's end. 3 weeks, maybe less if Margaret had already boarded a train. Clara folded the letter careful and tucked it into her apron pocket. She wouldn't burn it, not yet. It was proof of her sister's intentions, evidence of the threat bearing down on them. She walked to the window. The moon had climbed up over the eastern hills, casting silver light across the garden. Her garden. The tomatoes hung dark and heavy on their vines. The bean poles stood straight as soldiers against the night sky. Someone who stays put. Clara pressed her palm flat against the cold glass. I stayed. I'm staying. This is my home now. But even as the thought formed, a new fear crept in like frost under a door crack. Margaret was beautiful. Margaret was clever. Margaret had spent her whole life getting exactly what she wanted, and she'd never once let plain little Clara stand in the way of her ambitions. What if Silas sees her? What if he looks at that golden hair and that china doll face and changes his mind about what he wants? Clara shoved the thought down deep, buried it in the dark place where she kept all the fears she couldn't afford to feel. But it curled up there and waited, patient as a snake in winter. The rooster crowed before first light turned the sky gray. Clara was already up, already dressed in her best calico, the blue one, with the white flowers she'd been saving for something special. The one with bits of lace at the collar that Grandma had tatted with her own hands years back. She braided her hair tight, pinned it up neat, and looked at herself in the small mirror hung on the washstand wall. Plain face, brown eyes, nothing remarkable, nothing that would make a man's head turn on the street. Someone who stays put. She turned away from the mirror. Silas was waiting by the wagon when she stepped out onto the porch. The horse already hitched and stamping in the cool morning air. He'd put on a clean shirt, the collar buttoned up tight to his throat. His dark hair slicked back with water from the pump. He looked stiff and uncomfortable, and like a man about to do something that scared him half to death. Clara climbed up onto the wagon seat beside him. Neither one spoke as they drove toward town. The sun rose behind them, painting the prairie gold and pink. Meadowlarks sang their morning songs from the fence posts along the road. The wagon wheels creaked and rattled over the ruts. A rhythm Clara had come to know like her own heartbeat. Willow Creek appeared on the horizon. The same 3 rows of buildings, the same crooked sign swinging in front of the general store. But today everything looked sharper, more real. Like Clara was seeing it all for the first time through new washed eyes. Silas pulled the wagon up in front of a small white church at the end of the main street. Wooden cross on the steeple. Hand-painted sign by the door. Reverend Thomas Burke, pastor. Ready? Silas asked. Clara nodded. They climbed down from the wagon together, walked up the steps side by side. Silas reached out and pulled open the heavy wooden door. The church was empty inside. Morning sunlight streamed through the plain glass windows, falling in bright squares across the worn wooden pews. A simple altar stood at the front. Nothing fancy. A Bible lay open on a stand. And beside that altar, her back to the door, stood a woman. Clara's breath stopped in her chest. She knew that golden hair before the woman even turned around, knew that blue silk dress, too fine and too expensive for a little prairie church, knew the way those shoulders sat, straight and proud and certain of their welcome anywhere in the world. No, not yet. She wasn't supposed to be here yet. Margaret turned. "Hello, little sister." Her smile was wide and white, and sharp as a skinning knife. "Surprised to see me?" Clara couldn't make her legs move. Margaret stood by the altar like she'd been born there, like every room she'd ever walked into had been waiting just for her. The blue silk dress caught the morning light streaming through the windows, making it shimmer like water. Her golden hair was pinned up with pearl combs, real pearls, Clara reckoned. Bought with money their parents didn't have, but spent anyway, because Margaret always got what Margaret wanted. "Cat got your tongue, little sister." Margaret laughed, and the sound bounced off the wooden walls like breaking glass. "I took an earlier train. Wanted to give you a proper surprise." Silas's hand closed around Clara's elbow. Warm, steady, an anchor in a storm. "Miss Ashworth?" His voice came out flat as a planed board. "Nobody was expecting you this soon." Margaret's smile got wider. She looked at Silas the way she looked at everything she wanted calculating. Hungry, already counting up what it would cost, and whether she was willing to pay. "Mr. Harding, I've heard so much about you from family correspondence." She walked toward them, her silk skirts rustling on the wooden floor with every step. "My sister's situation has been quite the topic of conversation back home." Clara's stomach turned to cold grease. She hadn't written any letters home. Not a single one. "Oh, you didn't have to write, darling." Margaret stopped 3 feet away, close enough for Clara to smell her perfume, French lavender, the kind they sold at fancy shops back east, thick and sweet and suffocating. "Father has friends out here in Willow Creek. Did you know that the man who runs the general store sends him reports regular, keeps Pa informed of how his investment is paying off?" The floor tilted under Clara's feet. She grabbed Silas's arm to keep herself upright. "Father has spies here. He's been watching this whole time. Every bag of flour I bought. Every word I said in town." "What exactly do you want?" Silas asked. Margaret tilted her head to one side, that gesture Clara had watched her practice in the mirror since they were girls. The one that made men forget their own names and agree to whatever foolishness came out of her pretty mouth. "What's rightfully mine, Mr. Harding, the marriage you proposed in your letter, the land your father left you, the life my sister stole out from under me." "I stole nothing." Clara's voice came out stronger than she felt. "You refused to come. You called this place a dusty wasteland full of cow manure. You said you'd sooner throw yourself in the river than marry some dirt farmer who couldn't afford indoor plumbing." Something ugly flickered behind Margaret's eyes. A flash of the old temper, quick and hot, before she smoothed it away behind that china doll smile. "A woman has the right to change her mind, doesn't she?" "Your mind changed when you heard about the property value." Margaret's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went hard as river stones. "Practical considerations are hardly a sin, little sister. You should know all about that you've been living quite practically yourself these past months, haven't you? Sharing a house with a man you're not properly married to? Sleeping under his roof? Eating at his table like a wife when you're nothing but a hired girl playing pretend?" Heat flooded Clara's face, hot and shameful. The words were poison, aimed straight at the soft places, and they hit their mark dead center. "We came here to get married," Silas said. "Today, right now, before witnesses if there are any to be had." "Did you now?" Margaret turned to face him full on. How terribly romantic. A shotgun wedding in a little clapboard church. But I'm afraid there's been a complication. She reached into her silk reticule and pulled out a folded document. Heavy paper with official-looking print. I paid a visit to the county clerk's office first thing this morning. Lovely man. Very helpful once I explained the situation. She unfolded the paper with a sharp snap. I've filed a formal objection to any marriage between my sister and yourself, on grounds of fraud and misrepresentation. Clara's knees buckled. Silas caught her, his arm going around her waist, holding her up when her own legs wouldn't do the job. Fraud, he said, the word flat and dangerous. The photograph you received 2 years ago depicted me, Mr. Harding, not Clara. The letter you wrote was addressed to a woman matching my description: fair hair, blue eyes, cultured and refined. My sister assumed my identity to secure passage west and gain access to your property. Margaret's voice was sweet as honey poured over a blade. Any marriage contracted under such circumstances would be legally void from the start. The church walls pressed in close. Clara couldn't get enough air into her lungs. The room had gone thick and hot, and Margaret's perfume was everywhere, crawling into her nose and down her throat. That's a lie, her voice cracked down the middle. I never once claimed to be you. I never told anyone. The photograph, darling. Margaret held up the document like a winning hand of cards. Your name isn't written on the back of it. Mine is. Father's letters to the marriage broker confirm everything the arrangement was made in my name, using my likeness. The county clerk was most sympathetic to my situation when I explained how my own sister had deceived an honest rancher. Clara wanted to scream, wanted to fly across the church and claw that smile right off her sister's face. Instead, she stood frozen, trapped inside her own skin, watching her whole life fall apart around her like a house of cards in a windstorm. The objection stands until a judge reviews the case, Margaret continued, tucking the document back into her reticule. That could take months, perhaps longer, depending on the court calendar. In the meantime, no marriage can proceed. Silas let go of Clara's waist, took a step forward, his boots loud on the wooden floor. You think I give a damn about some judge in Cheyenne? Margaret's smile flickered like a candle in a draft. You should. Mr. Harding, without a legal marriage on file, you forfeit the land. Your father's will was mighty specific about the terms. I know what my father's will says. Then you understand I'm offering you a solution. Margaret spread her hands wide, the picture of sweet reason. Marry me instead. The original bride. The woman whose photograph you fell in love with. No fraud, no legal complications. The land stays in your name, and everybody goes home happy. Clara's heart stopped beating. No, he wouldn't. He couldn't. Silas stood rock still, his back to Clara. She couldn't see his face, couldn't read what was passing behind his eyes. The silence stretched out like taffy, thin and sweet and ready to snap. Mr. Harding. Margaret stepped closer, close enough to touch if she wanted to. Think about what I'm offering. I'm educated. I know how to run a proper household, how to entertain guests, how to represent a man of property in society. What can my sister offer you in comparison? She gestured at Clara without looking at her. A farm girl with calloused hands and dirt under her fingernails. A woman who doesn't know the difference between a salad fork and a fish fork. Clara looked down at her hands. The calluses, thick and yellow. The rough skin cracked from lye soap and well water. The half-moons of dark soil under her nails that never quite washed clean, no matter how hard she scrubbed. She's right. Look at me. Look at what I am. Nothing. Nobody. The shame was a living thing, hot and thick in her chest, crawling up her throat like bile. "You want to know what she can offer me?" Silas's voice cut through the silence like a blade through butter. Clara's head jerked up. He turned around, looked straight at Margaret with eyes gone cold as January. She fixed a clock that belonged to my father, a clock he spent years trying to make run again before he died. His voice was steady, certain, hard as the bedrock under Wyoming soil. She planted a garden in dirt that hadn't grown anything but weeds in 3 years, used seeds my mother saved back when I was just a boy, worked sunup to sundown without a word of complaint. He stepped back, putting himself beside Clara, his shoulder brushing hers. She sings hymns when she thinks nobody's listening, makes biscuits that taste the way home ought to taste, treats this old house like it matters to her, treats me like I matter. Margaret's smile had frozen solid on her face, fixed there like paint on a barn door. "Mr. Harding, I don't want a wife who knows which fork to use at a fancy dinner." Silas reached down, took Clara's hand in his, the calloused, dirt-stained, work-roughened hand. "I want a wife who'll stay put when times get hard. Your sister stayed. You never even bothered to show up." Margaret's face went white as bleached cotton, then red as a slapped cheek. The careful mask cracked right down the middle. And Clara saw what had always been hiding underneath the fury. The humiliation. The shocked disbelief of a woman who had never once in her whole pampered life been told no. "You'll regret this." Her voice shook like a reed in the wind. "When the judge rules against you, when you lose everything your father built, then I'll lose it." Silas squeezed Clara's fingers. With her standing beside me, Margaret stood frozen by the altar, her hands trembling at her sides, the legal document crumpling in her grip. "You're making a terrible mistake." "Wouldn't be my first. Reckon it won't be my last." The church door banged open behind them. Clara spun around, her heart slamming against her ribs. A man stood silhouetted in the morning light, bowler hat on his head, leather satchel under his arm. Pemberton. "Ah, Mr. Harding." He stepped inside, brushing trail dust from his coat sleeves. "I hoped I might find you folks here. There's been a development regarding your property situation that requires immediate attention." Clara's blood turned to ice water in her veins. Pemberton's smile spread wide across his face, showing all those teeth. "It seems Miss Ashworth here," he nodded toward Margaret, "has made the Western Land Trust a mighty interesting proposition. If her objection to the marriage holds up in court, she's agreed to purchase the Harding claim directly from the trust, for a generous sum." Clara's world tilted sideways, Margaret and Pemberton, working together this whole time. "The deed transfer paperwork is already drawn up and waiting," Pemberton continued, tucking his thumbs into his vest like a man who'd already won. "All we need is for the fraud objection to stand, and given the evidence Miss Ashworth has so kindly provided," he spread his hands wide, "well, I'd say your chances of keeping this land are slim as a fence rail. Mr. Harding?" Silas's grip on Clara's hand went tight enough to hurt. His jaw muscles bunched like knotted rope. "Get out of this church! Both of you! Now! Now! No need for hostility!" Pemberton didn't move an inch. "This is business, pure and simple. The land trust exists to ensure proper stewardship of valuable properties in the territory. Miss Ashworth has demonstrated herself to be a capable and well-funded buyer. She's never worked a day in her life. She doesn't need to work. Mr. Harding." Pemberton's smile got wider. "She has capital and connections, things your current companion lacks entirely." Clara wanted the floor to crack open and swallow her whole. Every word was true. She had nothing. Was nothing. A plain woman with dirty fingernails and a borrowed dress, standing in a church she had no right to occupy. Clara. Silas's voice. Quiet, but firm. She made herself look up at him. Don't you listen to a word they say. But they're right. The words ripped out of her before she could stop them. I came here with nothing. I am nothing. I can't help you fight this. You already have helped. He turned to face her square, blocking out Margaret and Pemberton with his broad shoulders. More than you'll ever know. How touching, Margaret said from behind him. Truly, it warms the heart. But pretty words won't save your farm. Mr. Harding. Clara looked past Silas's shoulder, saw her sister's triumphant smile, saw Pemberton's smug satisfaction, saw the future they'd already planned out between them. And something down deep inside her shifted. The shame was still there, burning hot in her chest. But underneath it now, harder and hotter. Something else was rising up. I fixed that clock. I grew that garden from dead ground. I stayed when Mary ran and Margaret refused to come. I stayed. Clara straightened her spine. The judge, she said. Her voice didn't shake. When exactly does he review the objection? Pemberton blinked, his smile faltering just a hair. 3 weeks from today. At the territorial courthouse in Cheyenne. Then we have 3 weeks. Clara turned to Silas. 3 weeks to prove I'm not a fraud. That I came here as Clara Ashworth. Not Margaret. That I never once claimed to be anybody but myself. Margaret laughed, high and sharp. And how exactly do you propose to prove that, little sister? Clara met her sister's eyes dead on. The letters Pa wrote? The ones arranging this whole marriage scheme. He kept copies of everything you know he did. Same as I do. Never threw away a scrap of paper in his life. She watched Margaret's face, looking for the tell. Those letters won't mention my name anywhere. They'll say yours. Because you were supposed to come out here. And you refused. Margaret's frozen smile cracked at the edges. If I can get hold of those letters, Clara continued, I can prove to any judge that I never committed fraud, that Pa sent me in your place without telling Silas the truth, that I'm just as much a victim of his scheming as anybody. Pemberton's eyes narrowed to slits. Those letters are sitting in Ohio. Miss Clara, 3 weeks isn't near enough time to get them. The telegraph office, Silas said quietly. Right here in town? We can wire a lawyer back east. Someone who can get into Pa Ashworth's papers legal-like and send us what we need. Clara's heart pounded hard against her ribs. It was a long shot, a desperate bet on a weak hand. But it was something more than she'd had a minute ago. You're wasting your time and your money. Margaret's voice had gone shrill. Losing that honey sweetness. Father will never cooperate with any lawyer. He's already on my side in this. Pa's never been on anybody's side but his own. Clara turned her back on her sister, faced Silas. It's a chance, maybe our only chance. Silas studied her face for a long moment, then nodded once, short and sharp. Let's go send that wire. They walked out of the church together, past Margaret's sputtering fury, past Pemberton's calculating glare, out into the bright morning sunshine. Clara's hands were shaking bad. Her legs felt like water under her, but she kept putting one foot in front of the other. 3 weeks. 3. Everything rides on what those letters say. Margaret didn't leave town. That was the hardest part of it all. She took a room at the boarding house on Main Street, and every blessed day for 2 weeks straight. She appeared at the ranch uninvited. Welcome. Impossible to send away without causing a scene. She walked through Clara's garden, trailing her soft, white fingers across the tomato vines like she was already counting up the harvest money. She sat herself down on the porch come evening time, watching Silas work the horses in the corral, her eyes following his every move with a hunger that made Clara's skin crawl like ants were marching under it. 2 weeks gone. No word from Ohio. Clara sent 3 telegrams in those 14 days. The first went to a lawyer in Cleveland, whose name she remembered from overhearing Pa's business dealings years back. The second went to Ma, begging for help, for the truth, for anything at all. The third went to the county clerk back home, requesting copies of any marriage correspondence on file with his office. Nothing came back. Not a single word. "He's blocking them," Clara said to Silas late one night after supper. They sat together on the porch, the kerosene lamp throwing weak yellow light across the weathered boards. "Pa, he must be intercepting everything. He knows what those letters would prove if they got into the wrong hands." Silas didn't answer right away. He was whittling at a chunk of pine with his pocket knife, the blade flashing in the lamplight with each slow stroke. Shavings curled off and dropped to the floor like pale ribbons. "We've got 1 week left." Clara heard her voice crack down the middle. "The hearing's 7 days from now. Without those letters as evidence, we'll figure something out." "How?" She turned on the bench to face him full on. "Margaret has Pemberton in her pocket. Pemberton has the full weight of the land trust behind him. They've got lawyers and money and connections all the way to Cheyenne. What do we have? What have we got to fight them with?" Silas stopped his whittling, looked up at her, his eyes dark and steady in the flickering light. "Each other." Clara wanted to believe those words, wanted it so bad her whole chest ached with the wanting. But hope felt dangerous now, like walking too close to the edge of a cliff in the dark. The lamp flame guttered in a stray breeze. A moth bumped against the glass chimney. Over and over, trying to reach the fire. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" The words slipped out before Clara could catch them and stuff them back down where they belonged. Silas's knife went still in his hand. "Who's that Margaret?" Clara stared down at her hands, clasped tight in her lap. "Everybody's always thought so. Ever since we were just little girls. Folks would stop Ma on the street to get a closer look at her. They'd pat me on the head and say I was the sensible one. The useful one. The one who'd make some man a practical wife someday." Silas set down the knife and the half-carved wood. "You know why Mary left the woman whose picture was in that frame?" Clara's head came up sharp. "What about her? She was beautiful too, just like your sister. Golden hair, blue eyes, a smile that could stop a man's heart from beating." Silas's voice was flat and steady, like he was reading words off a page. "She got off the train right here in Willow Creek. Stood on that platform and looked around at the dust and the empty sky and all that nothing stretching out to the edge of the world. Then she looked at me standing there in my dirty work clothes with mud on my boots." He picked up the knife again, started carving, not looking at Clara. "She didn't even come out to see the ranch, just turned around right there on the platform, walked back to the ticket window, and bought herself a seat on the next train heading east. Didn't say one word to me. Not even goodbye." The moth hit the lamp chimney again with a soft thump. Clara watched it spiral in the light. "I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me." Silas went on. "I'm telling you because I learned something important that day. Beauty hasn't got a thing to do with staying, not a thing to do with building a real life out here. It's just decoration. like paint slapped on a fence. Looks right pretty until the first hard weather comes along and strips it bare. Clara's eyes were burning. She blinked hard against the sting. "Your sister," Silas said, real quiet, "is paint. You're the fence." A laugh escaped her wet and choked and surprised right out of her chest before she could stop it. "That's about the least romantic thing anybody's ever said to me. I never claimed to be a romantic man." "No." Clara wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "No, I reckon you didn't." They sat there in the quiet for a spell. The night pressed in close around them, thick with cricket song and the distant yipping of coyotes somewhere out in the dark. "1 week," Clara said finally. "1 week," Silas agreed. Margaret came to the ranch at noon the very next day. Clara was out in the garden on her knees, staking up tomato plants that had gotten too heavy for their stems. When she heard wagon wheels crunching on the drive, she straightened up, shading her eyes against the midday glare, and saw the hired buggy from the livery stable in town pulling to a stop by the gate. Margaret climbed down from the seat. She wasn't wearing the blue silk today. Instead, she had on something simpler cotton. Cream-colored, almost plain by her usual standards. Her golden hair was pinned up loose, with strands escaping to curl around her face. She looked tired, older somehow. Clara got to her feet, slow, wiping her dirty hands on her apron. "Silas isn't here." "I know he isn't." Margaret walked toward the garden fence and stopped there with her hands gripping the top rail. "I came to talk to you. Just you." Clara's jaw tightened. "Why? Come to gloat some more. Tell me again how I'm nothing but a farm girl with dirt under my fingernails." Margaret didn't answer right away. She stood there at the fence looking at the garden, really looking this time. Her eyes moving slow across the rows of vegetables, the climbing beans, the herbs Clara had planted near the kitchen door for cooking. Something Clara couldn't read passed across her sister's face. "You did all this yourself? Every bit of it? It's—" Margaret stopped, swallowed. "It's beautiful. Clara, truly." Clara said nothing. Waited. Margaret's hands tightened on the fence rail until her knuckles went white as bone. "I got a letter from Ma yesterday. Came on the afternoon stage." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "And Pa's taken sick." Margaret's voice had gone flat, scraped clean of all that honey sweetness. "His heart. The doctor says he might not last out the winter." The news hit Clara like a bucket of cold well water thrown in her face. She waited for grief to come, for shock, for anything at all. What she felt instead was a strange, hollow numbness, like hearing about a stranger's troubles. "I'm sorry to hear that. Are you—" Margaret looked up, her eyes red-rimmed in the bright sunlight. "He sold you off, Clara. Sold you like you were a milk cow he couldn't afford to feed anymore. You ought to hate him for what he did." "I don't hate him." Clara stripped off her gardening gloves, one finger at a time. "I don't feel much of anything toward him at all, if you want the honest truth." Margaret's laugh came out bitter as black coffee. "That makes two of us, I suppose." Silence stretched out between them like a fence neither one knew how to climb. A bee droned past, fat and lazy with pollen, heading for the bean blossoms. "Why did you really come out here today, Margaret?" Margaret's jaw worked. She stared hard at the tomato plants, the bean poles, the neat, careful rows Clara had coaxed out of dead dirt with nothing but her own 2 hands and sheer, stubborn will. "I don't rightly know." Her voice dropped so low, Clara had to strain to hear it. When I first heard about this ranch, I thought this is my chance. Finally, a chance to have something that's mine, something that doesn't come from Pa's charity or some man's good favor. Clara watched her sister's face. Waited. But it isn't mine, is it? Margaret raised her eyes to meet Clara's. Really looked at her, maybe for the first time since they were children sharing a bedroom back in Ohio. It's yours. Every inch of it. You built this. You stayed and did the work when I couldn't even be bothered to get off a train. Yes, I did. Margaret's face crumpled up for just a moment, like paper crushed in a fist. Then she smoothed it out again, pulled it back into something blank and controlled. The letters. She reached into her reticule with trembling fingers. The ones you've been trying to get hold of. Clara stopped breathing. Margaret pulled out a bundle of papers tied up with kitchen string. Pa kept copies of everything he ever wrote. You were right about that. She held the bundle out over the fence between them. These are the originals. Every letter he sent arranging your passage out here. Every piece of correspondence with the marriage broker. Clara stared at those papers like they might bite her. Her hands wouldn't move from her sides. Ma found them in his desk after he took to his bed. Margaret shook the bundle, impatient. She put them in an envelope and sent them along to me. Said I should do whatever I thought was right. And giving them to me is what you think is right. Margaret's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. I think I'm tired. Clara. Bone tired. I thought I could waltz out here and take what you'd built. Make it mine through lawyers and legal papers and pretty words. Maybe charm your man away from you while I was at it. She pushed the papers toward Clara again. But I've been watching you these past 2 weeks. Watching you work this garden in the hot sun. Watching you cook in that little kitchen. Watching the way Silas Harding looks at you when you're not paying him any mind. Clara's throat squeezed tight. I can't compete with that, Margaret's voice cracked. I wouldn't know how to begin. Clara reached out and took the bundle. The paper felt soft, worn smooth from handling. She untied the string with clumsy fingers, unfolded the first letter, Pa's cramped handwriting, addressed to the marriage broker in St. Louis, describing Margaret's attributes in detail, her fair coloring, her refined education, her pleasant disposition. And there at the bottom, scrawled almost as an afterthought, if my elder girl declines the arrangement, which seems likely given her temperament, the younger may be substituted in her place. She is plain but capable and will cause no trouble. Make whatever arrangements you see fit. Plain but capable. The words blurred and swam before Clara's eyes. She blinked hard. The hearing is 6 days from now, Margaret said. Her voice steadier now. Those letters prove you were sent here under your own name, not mine. Pa made all the arrangements. You were never party to any fraud. Clara looked up from the papers. Why are you doing this? Margaret's eyes glistened wet in the sunlight. She turned away from the fence, started walking back toward the waiting buggy. Margaret, her sister stopped, didn't turn around. You asked me once what I could offer Silas. Clara's voice came out steady and strong. You said I had nothing worth having. Dirt under my fingernails, calluses on my hands. No education, no refinement, no social graces. Margaret stood motionless, her back stiff as a board. But I have something you don't. Clara held up the bundle of letters. I know how to stay in one place when things get hard, even when it hurts, even when it would be easier to run. Margaret's shoulders started trembling. I could teach you, Clara said, softer now. If you wanted to learn. If you were willing to try. The silence stretched out long and thin. A meadowlark called from its perch on the fence post. The buggy horse stamped one hoof and blew air through its nostrils. Margaret turned around slow. Her face was wet with tears. I don't know how to be anything except what I am. Neither did I. Clara set down the letters on the fence post, walked forward until only the wooden rails separated them. 3 months ago I was nobody. Plain Clara. The sensible sister. The one everybody overlooked because there wasn't anything worth noticing. She reached over the fence, took her sister's hand in her own. This land changed me. This work. This life. She squeezed Margaret's soft fingers. It could change you too, if you let it. Margaret stared down at their joined hands. Her own fingers were white and smooth, unmarked by any labor harder than needlework. The hearing, she said, barely louder than a whisper. Pemberton is expecting me to stand up in that courtroom and testify against you. I know. If I don't show up, he'll come looking for me. I expect he will. Margaret looked up at the ranch house, the garden, the barn where Silas would be riding in from the north pasture before too long. There's a spare room in the house, Clara said. The one I've been sleeping in. I could move my things into Silas's room. And you could... Clara, Margaret's voice broke clean in half. You'd really do that for me, after everything I've done, after everything I said. Clara studied her sister's face, saw the fear hiding underneath all that pride, the loneliness buried under the beauty. The woman who had never once in her life learned that some things were worth more than being pretty. You're my sister. Blood is blood. Margaret's face crumpled. She pulled her hand free, pressed it against her mouth to hold in whatever sound was trying to escape. I need to think. She stumbled backward toward the buggy. I need time to take all the time you need. Clara picked up the letters again, held them against her chest. The hearing isn't until Tuesday. You've got until then to decide what kind of woman you want to be. Margaret climbed up into the buggy seat, gathered the reins in her shaking hands, looked back one last time, her face wet and streaked. I'm sorry, Clara. The words came out small as a child's. For everything. All of it. The buggy wheels rattled down the drive, raising a cloud of red dust. Clara watched until it crested the rise and disappeared from sight. The letters felt heavy in her hands. Evidence. Proof. Everything she needed to win in court. But something bigger had happened here today. Something she couldn't quite put a name to yet. She walked back into the garden, knelt down between the rows, started working again, her hands moving through the familiar tasks without needing to be told what to do. The sun tracked slow across the sky. The shadows stretched and lengthened. Clara was still there in the dirt when she heard hoofbeats pounding hard on the road. Silas came riding in from the north pasture at a gallop, his horse lathered and blowing. He swung down before the animal had even stopped moving, striding toward her with something clutched in his fist, a yellow telegram paper. Came to the general store an hour past. He held it out to her, breathing hard. The clerk's boy ran all the way out to find me in the high meadow. Clara took the paper, unfolded it with fingers gone suddenly cold. The words swam before her eyes. Father died this morning. Stop. Mother requests your return immediately. Stop. Funeral Saturday. Stop. Saturday. The same day as the hearing in Cheyenne. Clara looked up at Silas, the telegram trembling in her hand. I can't be two places at once. Clara didn't go back to Ohio. She stood in the telegraph office the next morning, the reply form blank on the counter in front of her, the stub of pencil worn smooth in her fingers. The clerk waited behind his window, patient as a man who'd seen 1,000 hard choices made in this little room. Pa was dead. The man who'd traded her away like surplus livestock, who'd written plain but capable in a letter like she was nothing more than a serviceable mule, he was gone. There was nothing waiting for her in that house except a mother who'd never once spoken up in her defense, and a funeral that would only remind her of everything she'd spent her whole life trying to escape. She wrote 3 words on the form and slid it across the counter. Cannot come. Clara. Then she walked out into the bright Wyoming morning and went home to wait for Saturday. The courthouse in Cheyenne was smaller than Clara had pictured in her mind. A single room with wooden benches worn smooth by years of sitting, a judge's high bench at the front, tall windows letting in slanted morning light that fell in squares across the pine floor. The place smelled of dust and old paper and the nervous sweat of too many bodies packed into too small a space. Clara sat in the front row, the bundle of Pa's letters resting heavy on her lap. Silas sat close beside her, his rough hand covering hers, his calluses warm against her skin. Pemberton stood at the front of the room, bent over a table covered with legal papers, conferring with a lawyer in a black frock coat. His eyes kept flicking toward the door at the back of the room. He was waiting for Margaret. The clock on the wall showed 5 minutes before 9. The hearing would begin soon, and Margaret hadn't come. She's not going to show. Clara's stomach churned like butter in a dasher. Without Margaret standing up to testify, Pemberton's fraud case crumbled to nothing. But without Margaret there to swear the letters were genuine, the judge might question whether they were real at all. Please, Lord, let this work. The door creaked open behind them. Clara turned in her seat. Margaret walked in. She wore the cream-colored cotton dress again, simple and plain. No pearl combs in her hair today. No French perfume strong enough to smell from across the room. She looked like a different woman altogether, smaller somehow, less certain of her welcome, her red-rimmed eyes finding Clara's across the crowded courtroom. She didn't go sit with Pemberton. She walked straight up the center aisle and lowered herself onto the bench at Clara's other side. Pemberton's face went white as fresh bleached cotton. "Miss Ashworth," his voice came out sharp enough to cut. "What do you think you're doing?" Margaret kept her eyes fixed forward, her hands folded proper in her lap. "Sitting down, Mr. Pemberton. We had an agreement. You were supposed to. I know exactly what I was supposed to do." Margaret's voice was quiet but steady as stone. "I changed my mind." The side door opened with a bang. The judge came through a heavy-set man with gray mutton-chop whiskers and spectacles perched crooked on his broad nose. He settled into his high-backed chair, shuffled through a stack of papers, and peered out at the assembled crowd. "This hearing concerns the estate of Samuel Harding, deceased, and the marriage claim of one Silas Harding to one Clara Ashworth." He looked over the top of his spectacles. "Is the plaintiff present?" Pemberton stepped forward, tugging his vest straight. "I represent the Western Land Trust, Your Honor. We are challenging the validity of the proposed marriage on grounds of fraud and willful misrepresentation. And the defendants—" Silas rose to his feet. "Here, Your Honor, standing with my intended wife," where Clara stood up beside him. Her legs were shaking so bad she could feel her knees knocking together under her skirt. "Very well, then." The judge waved one meaty hand at Pemberton, Present your case. Pemberton launched into his argument, his voice smooth and practiced as a traveling preacher's. The photograph depicting Margaret Ashworth. The letter addressed to a woman matching Margaret's description. The allegation that Clara had assumed her sister's identity through calculated deception to gain access to Silas Harding's property. Clara listened to the words wash over her like dirty water, each one designed to make her small, to make her nothing, to scrub away everything she had built these past months with her own 2 hands. Then Pemberton called his witness. I call Miss Margaret Ashworth to the stand. Margaret rose from the bench, walked to the witness chair with her back straight and her chin held high, lowered herself into the seat and folded her hands in her lap. Miss Ashworth. Pemberton's smile was thin and sharp as a skinning knife. You are the elder sister of the defendant, Clara Ashworth. Is that correct? I am. And the photograph Mr. Harding received with his marriage advertisement, that photograph depicted you, not your sister. Did it not? It did. So your sister willfully assumed your identity in order to— No. Pemberton stopped mid-sentence. His mouth hung open for a heartbeat before he collected himself. I beg your pardon. Margaret turned in her chair to face the judge directly. Your Honor, my sister never once claimed to be me, not to Mr. Harding, not to anyone else. Our father arranged her passage west, using my photograph and my name, without her knowledge or consent. She arrived here in Wyoming as Clara Ashworth. She has lived at the Harding Ranch as Clara Ashworth. She never represented herself as anybody other than who she truly is. Pemberton's face went dark as a thundercloud. Miss Ashworth, we discussed— I have letters. Margaret reached into her reticule and pulled out a second bundle of papers, copies Clara hadn't known existed. Written correspondence between my father and the marriage broker in St. Louis. They state plainly that if I declined the arrangement, my younger sister would be sent in my place as a substitute. Clara was never party to any fraud. She was nothing but a pawn in our father's scheme. She held the letters out toward the judge's bench. These documents prove her innocence beyond any doubt. The courtroom erupted like a hornet's nest kicked over by a careless boot. Pemberton shouted objections. The lawyer in the black coat demanded an immediate recess. Clara sat frozen on the bench, watching her sister hand over the evidence that would save everything she'd built. The judge banged his gavel hard enough to make the windows rattle. Order, I will have order in this courtroom. Silence fell like a dropped blanket. The judge took the bundle of letters from Margaret's outstretched hand, pushed his spectacles up his nose, read through them slow and careful, his lips moving slightly with the words. Minutes crawled past like hours. Clara's heart pounded so loud she could hear it beating in her own ears. Finally, he looked up. These documents appear to be authentic. He set them aside on his bench. They establish clearly that Clara Ashworth was sent to Wyoming Territory as a substitute for her elder sister, with the arrangement made entirely by their father without her foreknowledge. There is no evidence whatsoever of fraud on Miss Clara Ashworth's part. He turned his gaze on Pemberton. Mr. Pemberton, your case has no merit. The objection to this marriage is hereby dismissed. Clara's knees gave out. Silas caught her before she hit the floor, his strong arm wrapping around her waist, holding her upright when her own body wouldn't do the job. Furthermore, the judge continued, leaning forward in his chair, I am prepared to authorize this marriage immediately, should the parties be willing. This will satisfy the conditions of Samuel Harding's will and secure Mr. Harding's rightful claim to his father's estate. Silas looked down at Clara, his eyes searching her face. Are we willing? Clara couldn't make words come out of her mouth. She just nodded. Then let's get this business done and settled, stood up from his chair. I'm ordained to perform marriages in this territory. We might as well handle it right here and now. The ceremony took 3 minutes flat. Clara stood at the front of the courtroom with her hands in Silas's hands, her voice steady as she spoke the vows. The judge's words washed over her duty, honor, sickness, health, all the days of their lives, and then it was finished and done. By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you man and wife. Silas bent down and kissed her, quick, gentle, a promise of more to come when they were alone. Clara turned around. Margaret stood by herself at the back of the courtroom. Pemberton had already gone, slipped out the side door like a whipped dog with its tail between its legs. The lawyer in the black coat had vanished right after him. Only her sister remained, standing there watching with something new written on her face, not envy, not bitterness, but wonder. Clara walked down the aisle toward her. They stood facing each other. Two women who had spent their whole lives on opposite sides of a wall neither one had built. "Thank you," Clara said. Margaret shook her head. "Don't thank me. I didn't do it for your sake." "Then why did you—" Margaret looked past Clara's shoulder, toward Silas standing at the front of the room, toward the windows and the bright Wyoming sky beyond. "Because I've spent my whole life being the beautiful one. The one everybody noticed. The one who got everything she wanted just by smiling pretty." Her voice dropped low. "And it got me nothing worth keeping. No home, no husband who loves me, no purpose to get up for in the morning." She brought her eyes back to Clara's face. "You have all 3 of those things now. And you earned every one of them." Clara reached out slow, took hold of her sister's hand. "Come back to the ranch with us. Stay for supper. Stay for a week if you want." She squeezed Margaret's cold fingers. "Stay as long as you need to figure out what comes next." Margaret's eyes welled up with tears. "You mean that after everything, you're my sister? That hasn't changed?" For a long moment, Margaret didn't move. Then her stiff shoulders dropped, and the tension drained out of her face like water from a cracked jug. "All right," she whispered. "All right, then." They drove back to the ranch in the late afternoon, the 3 of them together. Silas handled the reins. Clara sat beside him on the wagon seat, her hand resting on his knee. Margaret rode in the wagon bed behind them, her cream-colored dress already dusty from the road. The sun hung low over the western hills, painting the whole sky in shades of gold and rose and soft orange. The cornfields on either side of the road had turned to amber with the season, the heavy heads nodding and rustling in the evening breeze. "Stop here a minute," Clara said. Silas pulled the wagon to a halt. Clara climbed down from the seat, walked over to the edge of the cornfield, where the tall stalks rose up higher than her head, whispering secrets to each other in a language only the land understood. Silas appeared at her shoulder. "What is it?" Clara breathed in deep, the smell of dry earth and ripe grain, and the first cool hint of autumn coming on. "I want to remember this. Right here. This exact moment, before everything changes again." Silas reached down and took her hand in his. They walked together into the cornfield, the golden stalks parting around them like water, the sunset light filtering through in shafts and bars. The world narrowed down to this, the rustle of dry leaves, the warmth of his fingers laced through hers, the vast Wyoming sky burning orange above them. Clara stopped, turned to face her husband. "Silas? Clara, I'm not beautiful. I'm not graceful. I don't know the first thing about entertaining guests or making polite conversation. I'm not the kind of wife you probably pictured having someday." Silas looked at her, His eyes moved slow across her face, the plain features, the sun-browned skin, the wisps of hair escaping from her braid. You fixed a clock that hadn't run in years. You grew a garden from bare dirt. You stayed when everybody else walked away. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissed the rough knuckles one by one. That's the only kind of wife I ever wanted. Clara's eyes were burning. She blinked hard, but the tears came anyway, sliding warm down her cheeks. Silas wiped them away with his rough thumb. No more of that. They're happy tears. Tears are tears. He pulled her close against his chest. Save them for something that needs crying over. Clara laughed into his shirt. The sound surprised her, bright and full and real, rising up from somewhere she'd forgotten existed. They stood there wrapped together as the sun sank below the rim of the world. Two figures holding tight to each other in a sea of golden corn. Back at the wagon, Margaret watched with something new and soft in her eyes, not jealousy, not resentment, but a kind of wondering hope. The first stars came out above the eastern hills. Clara lifted her head from Silas's chest. We ought to get moving. Margaret's waiting. Silas nodded, but he didn't let her go right away. Clara. What? He reached into the pocket of his vest, drew out something small that caught the fading light and threw it back. A ring. Silver. Thin. Worn smooth with years of wearing. It was my mother's. She wore it every day for 40 years. His voice had gone rough around the edges. Told me before she died to keep it safe. Said to give it to someone worth keeping. Clara's breath stopped in her throat. Silas took her left hand gentle in his, slid the ring onto her finger. Welcome home, Mrs. Harding. The ring fit like it had been made for her. Clara looked down at it, the worn silver band. The small, pale stone that might have been a diamond, or might have been just glass. It didn't matter either way, and felt something settle into place inside her chest. Something that had been loose and wandering her whole life long. Home. She was finally home. They walked back to the wagon hand in hand, climbed up onto the seat together. Silas clicked his tongue to the horse, and they rolled forward down the road. And the ranch came into view, on the rise ahead the weathered cabin. The barn that still needed a coat of paint. The garden Clara had brought back from the dead with nothing but stubbornness and faith. Margaret leaned forward from the wagon bed. It's beautiful, she said, soft. Truly it is. Clara looked at the ranch in the fading light. The first lamp was already glowing in the window. She must have left it burning that morning. A beacon to guide them home. Yes, she said, it surely is. Silas guided the wagon up the drive and pulled to a stop beside the porch. He climbed down first, then helped Clara, then offered his hand to Margaret. The three of them stood there together in the gathering dusk, looking at the house that had somehow become something none of them ever expected. A home. A real one. Clara took her sister's hand in her left, her husband's hand in her right, and in. Come inside, she said. I'll put the coffee on. They walked up the porch steps together, their boots sounding hollow on the worn boards. Clara pushed open the door onto lamplight and warmth and the steady ticking of a clock that had learned how to run again. She paused at the threshold, looked back one more time at the cornfield. The fading sunset. The endless Wyoming sky going purple with coming night. Plain, but capable. She smiled to herself. That'll do just fine. Some stories stay with us longer than we expect them to. This one might have left something quiet sitting in your chest, a tenderness. Perhaps, or an ache you cannot quite put a name to. The feeling of being passed over. The weight of proving yourself to people who never bothered to look close enough to see what was already there. Many of us know what it means to stand in somebody else's shadow, to be the practical one, the dependable one, the one who keeps showing up while others come and go. Some of us have spent years wondering if anyone would ever truly see us, not for what we can do or what we provide, but simply for the person we have quietly become through all that steady endurance. There is no lesson here that needs saying out loud, no truth that has to be spoken to be real. If something in Clara's journey felt like your own, that is enough. You do not need to understand it, or explain it, or carry it anywhere beyond this moment. Some things are allowed to simply rest. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.